20% of Scotland's housing stock is pre-1919. And whatever anyone tells you, the way the small cottage was constructed and the way the large country house was constructed is pretty much the same thing, just a different level of investment, same skills, same trades. And in fact, generally, the listed buildings and things that are looked after or overseen by local authorities are only 3% of Scotland's total. And if we're to keep that, if we're to keep skills, trades, and supply chain to keep the good stuff going, we want to get the construction and the other sectors working on the rest of it too. There are many environmental reasons, as well as purely historic ones and cultural ones, why that stock is important. So our community, our stakeholders are not castles and palaces, although we do look after a few of them on your behalf for Scottish ministers. But that's down here in terms of numbers. And actually, in terms of empty homes, how many old buildings have we driven past all boarded up looking a bit forlorn? And it's interesting that the Shelter Scotland slide, the sort of screensaver slide, every single one of those buildings is the type of buildings that I've been mucking about with over the last 3 or 4 years. Mainly with energy efficiency, because that's one of the key things that we need to get right. But actually, an awful lot of it is about basic maintenance as well. So I don't see a huge disconnect between refurbishment for reuse in an empty homes type scenario and the energy upgrades that we require. Depending which standard you're going to, whether it's Scottish Housing Quality Standard or something a bit further, I can deliver quite a lot of those standards actually without too much difficulty. If you're refurbishing, you're making a mess. Whether you're making a mess with a bit of thermal upgrade or making a mess without, to me, isn't hugely different. And there's a couple of examples I'd like to talk through with you that really seek to demonstrate this does not have to be ball-breakingly expensive. And I'm suspicious of construction, and I come from construction myself, and I know where all the extra costs come in, and it's not always where you think they are. And sometimes by being quite an aggressive client, if you're in that position, saying, I want you to do this, 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 and this to this standard, because I'm telling you to do so, that makes life an awful lot simpler. This cottage here, which I'll discuss, is the Garden Bothy. It's in East Ayrshire, on the Dumfries House estate. Been empty for about since 2004. I got an architect to price the work in a conventional sense, proper sort of pricing and subcontractors, everything. £120,000 to bring. That's a 2-bedroom cottage. It's pretty wee. It just wasn't worth that. So we took it directly in hand and managed the works from basically myself and my other. And we did it for an awful lot less. In fact, £40,000 is actually what we spent. And we reduced carbon emissions by 90%. By some quirk of the Energy Performance Certificate, we went from a band G to a band G, which I would like to argue shows the limitations of the EPC and not the limitations of the site work. And if we don't get this sort of thing understood, if we accept that refurbishment is always going to be more expensive than new build, we'll end up with this situation, which is on the edge of Edinburgh, Craig Miller, an interwar social housing estate, good architectural standard. It was a planned community. There was nothing wrong with the idea of it, but for a whole lot of reasons it became unlettable. I think the council had a problem getting tenants, and it all spiraled from there, and other pressures too. So I'm not commenting specifically on that situation, but it's not one that we want to necessarily get into the habit of doing, and try to illustrate that refurbishment firstly can be easier and possibly cheaper than new build. And certainly in terms of the carbon, we've got to be saving a whole lot of carbon. And it was Bill Clinton who wrote, I think about 2 months ago, that urban refurbishment is the best way of not only reducing resource consumption, but about regeneration, employment, jobs, and the whole civic societal buy-in of the upgrade of an area. And this is my carbon crime scene ticker tape that I've been printed, that more partisan members of my profession will be scattering around at some stage. Now, Historic Scotland can't lobby a third degree, but joking apart, we have to think about resources and how we use them. So every cottage we see that's not inhabited, let's not demolish it, let's try and fix it. And how do we fix it and how do we insulate it? And these are the kind of key principles that we hold are necessary to get right with an older building. Otherwise you will get poor fabric condition and, more importantly, poor indoor air quality. And I won't say health issues directly, but sometimes the two are linked. I'm not a medical guy, and I'm not really in a position to become a medical person, so I can't comment, but there are links and there is literature that draws on it further. Free water vapor movement. There are no DPCs in this structure, and in our refurbishments there aren't any. Moisture advection, a little bit of air circulation and air movement is needed. Building control require you to have trickle vents in your windows. The area of a trickle vent, very crudely, is roughly equal to the air leakage you'll get around a normal wooden window. So you have to aspire, we need air to do that. That has to come in somehow. So we don't want to seal things up too much. I like chimneys a lot. A house without a chimney is for cattle. But that's rather a personal judgment and whatever. But I like the air shifting. These are the passive air movers of the products of what we breathe in houses. In contrast to this building that was redone about 4 years ago, an awful lot of mechanical air handling, which requires maintenance, servicing, capital cost. How long does that stuff last? 20 years, 25 years? So in 20 years' time I'll be asking the congregation for £250,000 to replace all this kit. Happy with that? Probably not. Benign materials, if possible, long life. This is just what I'm referring to. When I say long life, I don't mean a 5-year guarantee or a 10-year guarantee. I want a floorboard that will be there in 100 years' time. And I don't mean chipboard, which is what, 15 perhaps? Light touch, because light touch is cost effective. And we find generally that if you don't put most of it in the skip, you're not having to load it back up from the van to refit it again. So be very, very cautious about what goes out. And this comes back to resources. I cannot replace timber now from an older building with timber of better quality. The trees aren't there, they've been cut down. A lot of the timber from Scotland came from the west coast of the US, good quality stuff. You can't buy it now, it's not there. A lot of myth about walls, what they do, what they don't do, how they work, what lives in them, what you find in them. And a lot of it is a wee bit sort of hyperbole. I heard a guy talking recently, you don't know what's inside of the cats, all sorts. Really? Yeah. I haven't found any bones, and I've been pulling mass walls apart for 15, 20 years. It's exaggeratedly neat, I'll accept that. The key thing to remember, outside, wind, rain, water comes in to a certain point. After the weekend's weather, that's perhaps quite a long way. Sun comes out, dries out again. You have a wetting and drying cycle. And one of the concerns and problems with increased rainfall, and Scotland's got 40% more rainfall than it's had since the war, is that this wetting and drying cycle never dries out. So it gets wet, gets wetter, dries out, gets wetter still. And if we, as modern folk looking after older structures, cover that in cement that then cracks and draws the water in and holds it, cover that in granny's bumpy wallpaper, or paints it with 15 coats of gloss paint or whatever, that wall just sits there like a great sponge. 10, 15 years later, absolutely saturated, freezing cold, because a wet wall will conduct heat outwards much better than a dry one will. And the other one here, that water vapour coming off, latent heat of evaporation, so for water to evaporate, takes heat from the wall, so you're cold twice. You're cold because you're losing water heat by conduction, and you're also losing temperature because the water coming off as vapour takes the heat out of the wall, so you lose both times. And let's not forget the vapour loading of modern living, tumble dryers, showers, baths, all sorts of stuff, folk kipping for all hours of the day, and you need that transfer of water vapour into the fabric and back out again. And this is where an emerging consensus with older construction types and new sustainable construction, clay, modern finishes, actually very similar ideas, just using slightly different materials. Anyway, back to this building. And then this one here, which is my other little example, which is up in Benbecula as part of the Sustainable US project, where we took this one on and put about 30 grand to a refurbishment using local contractors. Techniques slightly in the way of what I'm referring to. It's hard on my own to be quite so high principled and sort of high and mighty about what you use. You have to use what's available. But essentially this was our extreme example, because if you can do it here and you can convince folk that this was an upgrade that worked, that was cost effective, and the tenants and the users of the building were happy, you could do it, you can do it in Edinburgh, you can do it in East London, you can do it in Stirling. Very, very exposed site, incredibly so. And actually the only slight fault in our project was that we had a new timber window made, and it needs to be a bit more airtight than it is. It's fine, but sometimes the pressure loading from the wind is just mental. This is the inside of the garden bothy, and I guess this is probably what a lot of empty homes in the constituency that we're talking about look like. Looks like a disaster area, and to some extent it is, but in fact we got volunteers in and we cleared out all the bad stuff. We got it back to just the bare surfaces, something looking a bit like these two. Got all the crap off the floors, carpets went away, everything all clear, let the air through the place, and already it started better. So the fabric was not too bad. Now, what was not there was all the sort of fittings and finishes, kitchen, all that sort of stuff that had gone and was broken. So there is a cost of finish there that I didn't have to bear. The estate has paid for that at about 5k, I think is what it came out like. This is the ground floor when the previous tenant had finished working out his frustrations on it. It's a slight irony that this was relined with a hemp board, and this was the material that had been grown in the attic with the help of some powerful lamps for a period of time. It was the police raid that so anyway, that is a modern lining, and normally if I had lath and plaster in the traditional sense, I'd probably be blowing insulants behind it or something. I wouldn't be removing it, but since this was done for us, we have the opportunity to do something different. This is the upstairs. Again, looks dreadful. We try to take off as much as the wallpaper and stuff like that as possible. And in fact, it wasn't too bad. It looked rubbish, but it actually tidied up quite well. Doors and some of the other fittings were fine. A lot of the facings were okay. So we did have holes in plaster and things, but it was mainly cosmetic. The bath was still there, and that has remained there. It's a kind of metal bath. It's not perhaps quite as shiny as it could be, but it works. And the effort of shifting it and the cost of shifting it wasn't worth it. There's some of the lath and plaster type thing. This is the void that I just mentioned, where we're seeking experimentally to blow materials behind that. In parts of Scotland, I'm very comfortable with doing that. In other parts of Scotland and in other types of houses where perhaps maintenance is not quite so good, or they're more exposed, I might think of other options, and I'll discuss those very briefly. So these are the interventions we did. Blowing materials behind the walls if you had a decent lining in place, and I do apply plasterboard to that as well, because if it's there you might as well keep it. If you don't want to go into the gap for any reason, we put a thin layer on the surface of the existing lining. Roofs is a very standard script. I don't want to bore you too much with that. Quite a lot of wood insulation, although other things are available. Lots of secondary glazing, double glazing where possible, and HS, we're fairly relaxed about that. We've got enough examples of how to do it in a decent way that respects the existing fabric, but gives you the thermal performance you need. Floors actually was the big surprise of all this. If your feet are not cold, you can be much more thermally comfortable with a lower internal air temperature, because you're not trying to make yourself warm down here by warming up here. And how we deliver heat to occupants is a really interesting question as the fuel prices rise. A little bit on doors, but I'll leave it on. If we get these insulation techniques wrong in any building, old or new or otherwise, and we get our dew points muddled up, and we think we're being clever, we actually cocked up, you end up with this situation here where you've got a mass wall behind it. It's actually a slate and lime wall behind it, about 600 thick. This is the standard modern sort of default scenario for dry lining. Vapor barrier there, sheet of plastic, your framing, which I think is 4x2 vertical studding here, infilled with mineral wool, and then plasterboard on the top. Whether that has a skim coat or not is a matter for the finish. and a skirting board to go on the bottom. Because of the way water vapour concentrates, if you get the over high concentrations and for whatever reason the ventilation regime in the space behind here isn't right, you get a lot of condensation. This has been going on, I think it's about 5 years or so, running down the back, rotting the timber framework there, producing all sorts of bad smells and that sort of feeling of damp you get when you go into a property sometimes. Even a property that's been done up, you think this isn't quite right, there's still something going on. It might be that you've got that situation. So we wanted to get away from this standard model. I don't argue that thermally it probably does make you warmer, but as well as being warmer, you get quite a lot of other less beneficial bits into the bargain. We put a lot of these around the place, relative humidity meters on the surface of the wall and in the wall itself and in the filled cavity, so we've got a feeling for what's happening. It's very easy to fill intervening buildings. It's a bit harder to actually know what's happening behind when you can't see and you've got no way. So these are wired remotely to data gatherers, and we've got a guy with a beard, spectacles and a white coat to manage those results for us, along with U-value measurements and in situ U-value measurements. So I'm not using build rates or anything like that. I'm actually working out what it actually is, and there are a few interesting surprises there too. This is bone insulation going in behind lath and plaster in a historic Scotland cottage in Hollywood Park. Very simple, very quick. Blown cellulose in this case, very sheltered, very dry. I was 100% confident that I didn't have any damp issues in the wall. It was our own building, so there was no pressure to get it right. Does make quite a few holes, sort of every metre or so up the wall. Check it with an infrared camera at the end just to make sure you haven't got any spots you've missed. A couple of issues about settling, but that's part of just getting in the habit of doing this. This is established stuff for cavity wall insulation, so it's using existing technology, existing machine, existing plant. We're just getting them to do it in a different place that the contractor hadn't thought of before. And we took the design risk. We went, oh, I haven't done that before, I don't know about that. Said, well, no, just do it, and we'll try it and we'll see what happens. That wall there is surface applied insulation, which is an aerogel carpet behind a wire mesh, expanded steel mesh, about 20-25 mil. Does need 2 coats of skim coat on top, so it's not a dirt-free, wet trades-free disruptive option, because it is. Whereas that is dry, but you'll notice there is a redecoration question at the end, depending on what level of finish. Do you take off skirtings? How far do you go with all this? And there's a kind of quick and dirty, cheap way, and there's a sort of bells and whistles way. And the difference in price is quite a lot, because you'll know the square meterage cost for redecoration. Will this get the green deal? Probably not. If you take it the whole hog, skirtings, patching up the holes and redecoration. Behind the plasterboard, this is social housing in East Glasgow, Saul Street. Quite a big cavity behind the plaster on the inside face of the masonry, and we got a 68% increase in U-value down to 0.33, which just caught the 2010 before the regulations changed in 2010. This stuff needed the electric wiring to be played around with. More modern stuff, which is bonded with a PVA type glue to hold it together, doesn't. So you've got a slight saving on it. You can see the electrician's been around because we've had to move a few wires. Goes in very quickly. Suddenly you find the limitation on this is when they park the truck. You can get tripped up by the most boring sort of operational issues. Anyway, it worked well and it gave good improvements. That was done 2 winters ago. We're now entering our 3rd winter with this product, and it's absolutely fine. The relative humidity has stayed pretty much similar, and in a mild, temperate climate, which is ours, believe it or not, we're pretty good about this. If you lived in the Alps, this might not be an option, because you make your wall colder, because you put a barrier between the inside here and the temperature of the wall. So conceivably you get a condiment dew point about 3 inches back from the outside face of the wall. That's if you live in steady state conditions, i.e. -20 outside, +15 or higher inside, whatever, and you've got this temperature gradient. We don't live like that. We've had, 3 degrees last week. We're now at 14 or 15 now. The temperature in the wall is doing this all the time, or the pressure gradient, so to speak, is shifting around. So steady state, by which on all these calculations are done, doesn't apply in much of Scotland. I was in Banchory last Monday evening, and there in midwinter, in February, you do get steady state. So sometimes this is not always applicable, but for the bulk of central Scotland, I'll argue it is. This is the stuff that goes on the surface. Existing lining stays in place, not too much goes in the skip. This is your aerogel mat, which is the closest thing I've found to the magic wallpaper. Sempertap is the quite common one that's being used in social housing. It's about 12 mil, it's thinner, but thermally it's good, but it's designed to stop mould. It's not designed to be a mighty thermal break, although it's a little bit more. This stuff is much better. We've got a U value about 0.7 after this stuff, so it is a better thing. And existing linings can more or less stay in place. That's the facing on a door, and excuse that wire there, that's not supposed to be there, but you can plaster off that without having to take stuff off. It doesn't mean you can't take it off, you can, but in terms of minimising work and disruption. This is the garden bothy on the ground floor. Remember the similar picture all kicked in. We left the rather strange looking fireplace because, well, we kind of liked it. We spent a fortune on a flagstone floor that went on top of an insulated lime concrete floor. Not because I expect that really you guys here are in the market for that sort of intervention, but I needed to prove certain technical things work, and lime concrete's talked about a lot, but it's not actually tried and tested and measured, so I need to do that for almost for other reasons. That's the hemp fibre between battens in the normal way. Clay board goes on top, and that clay board is in turn plastered. A little bit high end, I appreciate. I'm paying a bit more for this natural product, I'm paying a bit more for the clay board and not for standard plasterboard, and then I'm paying a bit more for a clay skin to go on top of that. But I wanted to manage the humidity that would come with a more airtight building. That's what it looks like with the clay plaster on the top. And that's just an indication of actually on the hard, and what we did in a National Trust cottage with this calcium silicate board. It's called Calcitherm, that's 40 mil thick. Good thermal improvement. Surprisingly expensive for something that looks like small sheets of the middle of a plasterboard sheet. You think, well, that's quite a lot of money, but it does work. We got caught out because this is a PVA-based glue, so it sticks beautifully and it's wonderful, but it's not vapor permeable because PVA, when it dries, as you know, forms a clear solid barrier. Will that cause us problems? I don't know. This product was developed in Germany, where because of their much colder profiles, they're not interested in vapour going through the wall. They're just interested in vapour going in and out of this. So you get the humidity buffering, but very much on the in and out side of it. Attics, I don't want to bore you too much about attics. So it's pretty much, I suspect you're well versed in that. Just ways of getting additional joists onto the top to get the thickness of 280 mil or whatever the requirement is. Coombe ceilings in rural properties in Scotland are a big bugbear, and very much considered hard to treat by mainstream insulation contractors because they're priced on incredibly tight margins. They really don't have time. They've got to get in and out of perhaps 4 properties a day, so they're not quite understandably interested in mucking about doing things into this area of the house here, which can be, depending on your roof plan, could be about 30% or so of the roof area. So the area above, which had it on the flat, is fine. Normal roof insulation, not insulation. This bit got missed. And this is what we've been looking at doing with a board type material. This was actually a hemp board, as it happened, or a wood fibre board, whichever, which you literally cut between the joists and slide down, and you have to have access from the roof, the very small, quite a small roof space above. And this is the cottage in Uist that I mentioned. This lining here, which in the Highlands and sort of West Highlands is quite a common finish internally. The joiner actually took all this off, and how it didn't smash into 1,000 pieces, I don't know. Put the material behind, you can see the rafters that went behind, and put the board back on. That's worked really nicely. That's what sliding a board down looks like. It's a fiddly operation. It's not very bonny, it's not very comfortable, but it's not particularly difficult. Your worst thing is that you don't catch on the nails coming through the sarking. Air gap, normally 40 mil or so between the underside and the sarking. That's very standard. I'm not a fan of blowing in expanding foam. I haven't quite got there yet. Windows, I suspect, will interest you a wee bit. Quite a lot of what I feel about urban spaces in the UK, and particularly Scotland, is the amenity we're providing. You know, we can provide people with accommodation of all sorts, shapes and sizes, but I'm a believer in some form of aesthetic amenity. Life is more than just living in insulated cubes. And windows are one of the more dominant governors of that environment, particularly as by the nature visual. This is social housing in Kirkcaldy in Northgate. How do I get the thermal performance of its modern, as it happened, aluminium replacement? Think of all the embodied energy that's in there, against its the more sort of let's say the more classical geometry of the original version. I think it's about 1935 or so. It's not 4 in the block, it's a sort of 2 in the block. So brick, cavity brick, all sorts of interesting wall insulation challenges there. But windows, what do we do? And I think we've got a reasonable set of options now. First thing, a single piece of glass is absolutely as cold as hell. I can't argue that any different. And the convection downdraft from a fully sealed window with no air coming in from the outside at all is considerable, because you've got air from your room cooling on the inside face, running down like this, and your foot is there saying, I'm in a draft. You are in a draft, but it's in a draft of cooled air that's coming down. So how do we reduce that? Well, 19th century roller blind, very effective, 20% improvement in your value, and it also stops the draft as well as addressing the conductivity of the glass. Not something you have in the day, or if you're living there during the day, that's perhaps not what you're after. Shutters we found was about a 35% improvement, particularly if we insulated them. Not everyone has them. It's not really an empty homes thing, to be honest. Secondary glazing, this is an acrylic sheet, £40 a square metre, which is actually about as cheap as you're going to get. If you get a mainstream one done in glass with a proper fitting for a reasonable size window, perhaps a sash window that's in the height of that panel there, £450. Well, most people say, oh, I don't need a plastic window for that, thanks very much. And they'll be right, it's a lot of money from the garden. So polycarbonate and acrylic windows now, secondary glazing are probably the answer. Whether they get the Green Deal or not, because they're fairly portable, like you can take them off, remains to be seen. We're trying to argue they are, because they're made for the window, they cut the right size, the magnetic strips that hold them on, you can't take the strips off easily, so we hope to get that through. This is a window I had done in Stromness, double glazed into a building that had, let's call it a more modern alternative that wasn't quite so bonny, and this is to test exposure. Timber in a maritime climate seems fine. And I had 6 different types of paint put on there, including a linseed oil paint, just to see what the emotional response. Because whenever you say wooden windows, they rot in 2 years. Well, okay, I'll try it. I'll see that. Or you put new glass into the existing sashes, and that's one of the ones we quite like. Reasonably costly. So whether that's entirely within our remit here, you may find it's cheaper to make a new sash. There's some new sashes going into Garden Bothy that I mentioned. Sadly, ACU, who just got into making these type of units, went and bust about a month ago, which is a pain. Anyway. Floors I mentioned, insulating under timber floors, I thought was always going to be a destructive mess. I didn't really want to go through the bother. Actually pretty straightforward. Every 6th or 7th floorboard, if your joint's got long arms, and the benefit was very, very significant, even in an unheated building, because this was a building undergoing work. And these guys here, you can see them casting back some of the boards. They said, well, because they had their piece in this room every morning, they said that they just felt a whole lot warmer because the heat wasn't there to their feet. So oddly enough, I'm thinking that's the first thing people should do generally. If you have a concrete floor, a pre-1984 concrete floor, which is perhaps directly onto type 1 or the bottoming of the floor, there's nothing on earth that is colder than that, and I'd strongly suggest some form of intervention. I don't care about concrete. You can break it up, you can smash it up, replace it with whatever you want. There's no loss there. This is lime concrete. a bit of a fussy fiddle, possibly quite expensive, but certainly it works. That's the expanded tray aggregate, which gives you the insulation power, and the lime concrete goes on top. You'll recognise the about a half there from earlier. That's what it looks like when it's finished. Should be a half there, no, don't worry about that. Doors also, I'm a huge fan of upgrading in situ, so instead of saying that door's an old door and it's cold and into the skip it goes, okay, it is cold, but let's play around with it. This was, I think, about 3 or 4 hours work by Joanna. It's pretty cheap and pretty cheerful. An aerogel sheet, an aerogel mat, held behind plywood, and little beads just to raise the temperature of the hall a little bit more. This is social housing Edinburgh, unless you can see some of the wall insulation there. They've even managed just to take the right fitting just out another ½ an inch somehow. Again, minimising your own costs, your associated costs and intervention. That's what the detail looks like. Playing around with your fielded panels, that's all we're talking. Or you can use less bonding material on a linked and brace door as I did there more for an experiment, but it does work. Or you can indeed pay a fortune for a modern insulated door that I forked out for about 1,200 quid. A bit disappointed actually. Very light, doesn't feel heavy, doesn't feel solid. Certainly it works, I'm not arguing with that. So again, it just reinforced my thing that I was better off upgrading what I had than getting a new one. Wider themes, detechnologised solution. Thermal comfort is more simply than achieving a very high internal air temperature. What about indoor air quality? What sort of atmosphere are we giving for owners and tenants to actually to live in? And there is a downside to everything, and increased airtime is something to watch. Embodied energy and resources. This comes back to how aggressively you refurbish, and facade retention being the most extreme form of so-called refurbishing. And an acceptance that the fabric can probably only go so far. The best results I've got on a mass wall with a 0.33 results for the Sword Street project. Can I get any lower? Within achievable means, probably not. I won't touch on micro-renewables. To me, that's always a top-up. But certainly, tenement roofs is a very good option. This is the community self-build project. I might have mentioned to some of you, there is an energy efficiency upgrade ticket hiding at the back of this. But actually, this is about empowering a local community to take charge of a wreck that they've been looking at for the last 15 years and to do something about it. And without drifting entirely off message, with about £600 from me and a fair amount of goodwill on their part, we've been having a bit of fun in keeping the water out in the first stages. And in fact, it's not difficult to keep the water out. And with older buildings, if you keep the water out, they more or less look after themselves until such times as you've got the resources, the money, the finance to perhaps do the harder bits inside, which is really the electrics and the plumbing, to be honest. Wall linings, doors, skirtings, it's all there, it's all lying around in bits and pieces, but we can all do that back together again, that's not difficult. A little bit of structural joinery, which is just testing our soaring ability, but that's nothing that they can't learn. And very, very empowering. Vandalism stops, all sorts of good things happen as a result of that. This is not a dwelling, so it's not strictly anti-homes business, but it's in terms of community self-build and how that works, it's very interesting. And for me, the listed building here was at real risk of total destruction. It's not fully dry yet, we're not fully finished by any measure, but I'd say for £5,000 I might have a dry building in perhaps in a year's time, and that's got to be really good. For the technical reports that go with some of this activity, particularly energy efficiency work, if you search for Historic Scotland Technical Research, you'll get to my page and you'll see some of the rather dry reports on individual things, and I'm hoping that in the next week or so I get some case studies up of sort of some of the buildings that you've seen there that just describes what we did. Put in this, did that, results was this. And also, it wasn't difficult, it wasn't hard. These were basically ordinary contractors just being asked to do things in a very slightly different way. And by and large, it's been pretty successful. Happy to discuss. How are we for time?
Probably got about 5 minutes. Yeah. The next session starts at 5.
So yes, happy to sort of catch some questions.
You talked about putting double glazing into existing windows. Are existing window frames able to take the additional weight? And will sometimes be problems with that?
It's one of these stories that tends to fly around, and then you try and sort of dig back to the sort of child maimed by a falling sash, and the story's not to be found. But it's no point. What's happening now is that the double glazing is 3 mil, 4 mil gap, 3 mil. That's a total weight of glass of 6 mil, which is a single piece of modern float glass anyway, which most windows have got new glass in, to be honest. The amount of old, thin, really old glass is negligible now. So that seems fine, and also, if the sash is a bit shabbier, you just adjust the sash weights and it seems to be fine. But yeah, you want to have them in good nick, there's no doubt about that. And there's a little bit of work in rounding out perhaps another 3 or 4 millimetres back into the astragal, so that your slightly thicker unit can get a decent bed. It's not difficult, but the joiner needs to want to do it. It's one of these ones you've got to tell. That's what I want, and that's what you're going to do. Happy with that? No, we'll do it anyway. You perhaps just have to specify that. And certainly HS is pretty cool, pretty relaxed about that now. In all but the cases where you've got, Uber glass with Walter Scott's name scratched on it, or something like that. But very relaxed. So it's on.
I would agree with that comment, because we've used that in 2 buildings in Haddington quite successfully.
Yeah.
But the only problem that we've had is where we've tried to incorporate the building regulation permanent vent or control of the vent, the top up traditionally with the top sash. And that's been a big bugbear, just how to get that to fit in with the historic appearance of a sash and case window.
We've ended up, and it sort of each year we come up with a new idea of where it should be. Some in the top rail, some in the bottom rail of the top sash, and then one at the side. There's a new one we did at Campbelltown for actually the side, top and the bottom of the pulley style with some Intec mesh across, and they couldn't close it off. So it's one of those ones where there's a little bit of iteration still to go, I think, before we get the perfect answer. Or you could have a nice plastic controllable one, but just say we'll change it.
I think it seems to the objection seems to be the sort of curved top one, which is designed to keep the rain off. But if you think about it, the window's set probably 100 to 150 mil back from the face of the building anyway, so
You've got to have pretty
rain
brutal
water's
rain.
never going to affect that. So probably just
Yeah.
a plain insect mesh getting
I think
draws and plain to the answer at that point. I don't know.
I agree. Just go for that.
The government's, sorry, I don't know if this is going to take us off. You mentioned at the start of your presentation that the EPC, on one properties is going from a G to a G. I don't know if that was unique to that circumstance, but it sounds quite concerning.
It is. Well, EPCs and old buildings are still getting to grips with their relationship. And is RDSAP, which is the stuff behind it, is going through a second edition, which will allow us to put in actual U values or estimated U values based on intervention. Part of the problem with Garden Bothy is it was heated by, has been got up by a wood pellet stove, wood pellet boiler, and RDSAP, to my knowledge, doesn't do renewables heat sources, I don't think, in some way that it should do. So I kind of quoted it as a bit of a sort of teasy joke, really, to illustrate that the EPCs are quite a blunt instrument in certain cases, and I don't object to the process. We've got to have a process of some sort, but it's so early on that it hasn't really been tweaked yet to get the right
I'm
eyes.
confident as you say, the changes to the SAP will
I
become the
think
anomaly.
I suspect it will take 2 more goes because of the speed at which these things come in, the consultation, who's around to read it, who responds, what gets adopted, what budget there is to actually pay the remodelling of the software. It's not really my subject. I should know more because it's the key to everything. I mean, it's at the root of the Green Deal and all sorts of other complex machinery, not least of which is working out the payback time for Green Deal and the benefits that you'll get from Green Deal. And one of the scary things for me, and the consultation for Green Deal's out now, and I urge you all to perhaps, if you can bear wading through 270 pages, is that the savings that the homeowner thinks he's going to get through doing a range of measures, may not be there, because the wall was perhaps insulating better anyway, because it was thicker and quite meaty, and they therefore don't make those annual savings, and they're therefore actually out of pocket, and that's, you know, that's a sensitive political issue. Sorry, yeah.
As you know, the government's running all this universal home installation scheme for insulate everything under the sun. And the next thing we have the cheap properties,
Yeah.
you know, so they take cognizance of what you're saying. I mean, they pay heed to what the people are supposed to know. Because I mean, as you know, after cheap, let's go and just throw up a dry line and insulate it and bang, walk away, and that's it, facts. You know, is there any? Because I mean, the people who run these schemes don't know the details.
No.
They're relying on people like yourselves and the governments get advisory bodies say, oh, you can do X, Y and Z method, don't use X, Y and Z, it might cause you interstitial condensation, whatever, you know. So I'm just wondering, because I do all that as well, and it's just like, how much do we check in terms of what the installers proposing?
There's a whole bow of pain there, and installers who've got themselves quite well geared up, because there's some quite good business in this.
It's 12 a week commitment now, US, you know, so they're just like
They're
all
flying-
jumping, they're
flying
just
into it.
they're overloaded and
and
flying through the work.
And we can't say, this is bad, you can't use that, this will wreck your house. We can't say that. And EST say we've got to offer everyone everything, and they have to make a choice. And so we're slightly scurrying around trying to say, well, look at this and try and make the right choice. And these are the examples that we've been doing. So our advice features quite a narrow view of the world in terms of where we think how things should be done. On a fairly short evidence base. It is only 3 or 4 years old. So we'll say, well, what do you know about it? You've only been doing it for 3 years. Well, at least I'm checking my results, which is more than the dry lining boy does. Does he go back 10 years later and see how Mrs. Jones's wall is? No one cares. It's gone, it's done. So, and feeding into the Green Deal, we're trying to get the training modules for the installers with bits for older properties or pre-1919 properties. And as properties go on, you get a multiplicity of different construction types. You've got the no fines concrete, you've got the system houses from just before the war and after it, you've got all sorts of sort of weird hybrids, some of which were successful, some of which weren't, but are still with us, and every level of oddness. But to answer your question, we're kind of rather frantically engaging with almost every level to say we want some sort of provision for control of interventions in older buildings.
Because you said non-traditional properties as well. After 1919, there's thousands of them out
Oh
there.
yeah.
Which, you know, you need to dry line or whatever you can do.
I've got a project I just got funding for with BRE Scotland and Napier University on the technology park at Ravenscraig. And it sounds balmy, we're rebuilding a 1935 400 block to 1935 spec, and then refurbishing it twice or 3 times with a whole lot of different options. Because that's a massive housing stock in Scotland. I think it's 250,000 or even more of them. Everywhere, wherever you go, you see, oh, 400 block, you know, suddenly starting noticing. But nice, attractive, nice buildings, nicely proportioned, you know, I call it the last gasp of the Scottish vernacular. And keeping the aesthetic capital of those up, I think it's really important. And it might, nice houses, aren't they? And they're good sized rooms, people like that.
The quality of council stock is not on track. Just because of the nuisance.
Is it?
We just saw, you know, that council.
You have to just try to close it, but what's stopping August as well?
So the email, if you, sorry, that one there, just give a, get the details.
Thank you, Roger, for
Thanks so much.